start with a prayer. I've heard so much about last week and I was out of town, but I'm looking forward to the continuation of the discussion. In the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Illumine our hearts, O Master, who lovest mankind with a pure light of your divine knowledge, and open the eyes of our mind to the understanding of your teachings. Implant in us also the fear of thy blessed commandments, that trampling down all carnal desires, we may enter upon a spiritual manner of living, both thinking and doing such things as are well-pleasing unto you. For you are the illumination of our souls and bodies, O Christ our God, and unto thee do we ascribe glory together with thy fathers from everlasting, and then all holy, good, and life-giving Spirit, now and ever, and unto ages of ages.
Amen.
Amen. Beautiful. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. All right, I just need to grab a set of notes here, so.
You didn't grab anything. I mean, thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate seeing new faces and the same faces regularly. You know, this is a program that Mr. Nuno, Deacon Nuno and I have been talking about for a while, the idea of continuing.
Mr. Deacon.
Mr. Deacon. We've been talking about for a while, and it's great to have it actualized. There's notes and maps over there. Please pass them around to these guys. We need another table.
We'll take care.
So I'm gonna spend a little time on a tiny bit of review, just so we can kind of like lay the groundwork and hit the ground running.
Is anybody here for the first time tonight? So can you explain who you are?
I can do that. Okay. My name is Eric Medvich, and I've been a parishioner here since 2011. Me and my wife Peggy were married under Father Jim and Father George and Deacon Isa in 2012. And right away, there was opportunities for me to help the church. Originally, I was asked to help teach high school classes for the kids at the time. The focus at the time was learning about the liturgy and marriage from an Orthodox perspective, which was great because those were the things that I was learning about too. And then I've had multiple opportunities to do some classes and to share. And I really enjoy getting to do it. And I consider it a privilege because Father Jim and Father George trust me to do it, even though I feel mildly incompetent while I'm trying to do it. But so the goal here is to continue our Orthodox education. We started off previously.
I gotta say something else. You're not telling them everything.
I know, it's not.
Eric is a longtime friend of our community and a parishioner here. He's an Orthodox Christian, but he wasn't raised Orthodox, he was raised Catholic. So, and he has an interest in history. He's a student of history, but he's also a theologian. He has taken courses at the House of Studies. And did you finish?
I wasn't able to finish.
Okay, so he's on the track to eventually, when he's had children since then, and so things got busy, to prepare for the possibility of ordination. So he's educated and he's on that path, and he's very knowledgeable. And so we asked him to be part of the ministry of our church and helping to teach and to educate, especially when it comes to issues of history. And so we're so blessed to have people like this in our community. They might not be ordained as priests, or sometimes they're subdeacons. We have a lot of theologians who have the same degree as the priest. And they're just not ordained as priests. Not everybody. It took me 10 years before I got ordained. After I graduated seminary, I could have come out as a priest, but everybody's on a different path. So that's Eric, who Eric is. And I wanted to put it into context because you're just not some, I use this word a lot. Nobody knows what it means, but I say Yahoo. You're not some Yahoo who just decided, hey, can I speak? No, I mean, you've been, you have training and you have the blessing to do this. And we just really appreciate the time and effort that you have given to us ever since really you got to know us. So continued blessings to you. And thank you, all our gratitude.
I appreciate that very
Thank you.
much. I don't think of myself as a historian or a theologian. I think of myself very much like everybody here. I'm here to learn. I'm here to be around other Orthodox people, to learn more about how to think Orthodox. We go back to some of our sessions before, the phronema, the mindset, right? And also, with the benefit of our great spiritual leadership here, we get to see the cornerstone of Christ and conform ourselves to that. And so I'll tell you the truth. I get mildly terrified when I start writing these things because I want to get it right. I want to get it right for you, and also so that I'm not teaching you the wrong things and then somebody's not very happy with me about that.
Try giving a sermon, right?
Right? I'm sure it's got to be, you know, that whole thing, because you're, you know, one of the commandments is don't carry the Lord's name in vain, and a lot of people take that to be about cursing. But from what I've studied, it seems to be more about don't take the Lord's name on yourself and go out and do the wrong thing with it, right? Because in the Old Testament, we'll do this real quick. In the Old Testament, the priests would actually wear a name on them that represented God. So it was part of their station to represent God to the people. So that's taking God's name upon yourself as an ambassador, or, you know, however you'd like to look at it. So now that we've gotten over the mildly terrifying part, I just want to give a quick overview of what we talked about last time. What we're talking about here is we're looking at the development of Roman Catholicism as a parallel line, so to speak, in time frame to the development of the Orthodox and Byzantine paradigm. And so what I did was I started off by talking about the history of Rome itself, the mythological and the historical elements to it, talked about how the city itself and the people in the city have always kind of considered themselves to be something special. The city on Seven Hills was supposedly bringing civilization to the world. Now, that was elevated when Christianity conquered the Roman world without a shot fired, I might add. But that kind of concept has always been there. The city of Rome itself, obviously, was the capital of the Roman Empire. And so it had a whole lot of prestige. It had a place in the world that was above all the other cities in Rome. And so when we started off by talking about the history of Rome and some of its attitudes. We described some of the periods it went through: the kings, the republic, and then finally the empirical time. We talked a little bit about the ecumenical councils. I'm flipping through the old notes just so I can get the references right. And then I talked about the fall of Rome itself, some of the factors that were involved in it, including if anybody has their old map here, including the migrations and military force used to have the so-called barbaric kingdoms move into Western Europe. And I'm gonna pass this one along on this side. I think I'll do more, so you guys can kind of share a little bit. But the long and the short of that is, over time, Rome itself, the city, and the Western Empire that developed after the beginning of the imperial period started to become, for lack of a better term, bloated and corrupt. There was a lot of money being wasted. There was migrations of various peoples in the area that were having an effect on trade, that were having an effect on the citizenry. And then eventually in 476 AD, after movements from such groups as the Alans and the Vandals and the Goths and the Ostrogoths, finally Rome itself was brought to heel, and the last Western emperor died, and that was the end of the Western Empire circa 476 AD. So where we were, we kind of left Rome talking about it in ashes, so to speak. The last thing I put on there was in the notes was a list of the popes, quote unquote, from approximately 42 AD to 476. The path of the popes, so to speak, begins with Peter the Apostle. The tradition of the Catholic Church is that he was the first pope, though at that time nobody would have called him a pope. Just he would have been called the Bishop of Rome. But after Constantine makes Byzantium the new capital of the empire, called Constantinople, named after himself, would be perfectly reasonable, right? After that, when he leaves Rome, he defines this idea of diocese. So that leaves, when he goes to Constantinople, that leaves the bishopric of Rome as the largest Western diocese. Okay, which, in keeping with the history of Rome, makes it a very important place, right? By 476, the city falls and the Western Roman Empire collapses, and what that leaves with us is the Eastern Empire. And from this point on, I'll just go ahead and refer to it as the Byzantine Empire, even though it's not, historically they didn't call it that till later. That's neither here nor there. They consider themselves to be Rome continuously. In fact, if you ask those Greek people at the time, they'd say they were Romans and not Greek. But we'll refer to it as the Byzantine Empire in order to kind of keep it straight, right?
In the
So-
Middle East, they call Orthodox Rome Orthodox.
What's that?
In the Middle East, they refer to the Orthodox as Rome Orthodox,
Oh,
meaning that that was the Christian church in the Roman Empire. So that's how they make that connection with the Roman Empire. They call them Rome Orthodox.
That's what the Muslims would always consider Greeks, even until the revolution in 1812 or 18.
so,
They consider them what?
They always
Roman.
call themselves Romans.
Yeah.
But
So,
they're Romans.
like I said before, I'm not here to present evidence for which we bash upon the Catholic Church. I'm here to present the evidence of how things progressed in that area, and I'll allow you to make your own decisions. As I said to Deacon Nunu on Sunday, I hope we understand that even if we're not technically brothers, we're at least cousins, right? There's so much more about the Catholic Church that we actually have in common than that we don't. The things that we don't have in common are important and they're not to be forgotten. But that should not necessarily make it so it has to be, a blood feud or something like that. That's my opinion. If I'm wrong, Father George or Father Jim can feel free to tell me. But we also talked about,
We all come from the same place.
that's right. And
Can't forget that.
the first, up until 476, at least, we can say pretty reasonably, the thing that most of the popes have in common is that they were martyred, and they were martyred for their witness for Christ. And that's worth talking about. So just to kind of go through a couple of the highlights, somewhere around 100 AD, St. Alexander I establishes the use of holy water. St. Telephorus later on is attributed with the midnight mass. And so what happens is the popes are the conservatorship of the deposit of faith in the Western portion of the empire. And so not surprisingly, because they did that, they were often martyred, and they were in Rome, which originally was very pagan and had a lot of hostility toward the Christian ethos. I don't want to say religion because it puts a different connotation. So Saint Stephen from 254 to 257, he fought against the Novatian heresy. And so one of the things that you see over time is that often the popes are the ones who are a bulwark against heresy of various forms. So that was 257. 314, the Edict of Milan is announced, and all of a sudden Christianity is now a legal religion. So throughout the empire, now you have a lot more converts to Christianity. But the empire itself hasn't expanded the borders of Christianity outside of itself for the most part. Now, some of the seeds of division, so to speak, start to happen even before the 400s, even before we get into, St. John Chrysostom is doing his homilies around in the 400s. The same time, St. Augustine is developing his Christological thought in Alexandria, and he goes on to become very instrumental in Catholic thinking later on. And the East kind of you know, they don't think he's quite so hot, so to speak. It's not that he was disregarded, it just wasn't taken as gospel very quickly. It wasn't adapted. Whereas in the West, it was adapted very well. Part of the reason why Augustine becomes so important is because he's also a part of the development of the rationalistic philosophy of the Roman Catholic Church. They'll make more use of that later on, but I'm just kind of like laying the groundwork here. So in 366, Saint Damascus gives them their first Latin version of the Bible, and this is important because now there's there's a nationalistic divide that kind of begins there, with the East moving on with Greek as their general conformed language, and the West moving into Latin as their, lingua franca, as it were.
When did you say that was? No.
Somewhere around 370. He was the Pope from 366 to 384. He had a pretty long reign. But he's the one who's credited with pushing the first Latin version. So, somewhere around 400, Saint Innocent starts writing letters about the authority of the Pope. 410, the Visigoths sack Rome for the first time. And then in 476, the final blow comes and the Western Empire starts to collapse. So, but the Roman Catholic Church doesn't collapse. The city does, the government does, biggest government shutdown ever. It never came down, right? But the popes, the Catholic Church continues on, and it's one of the most unifying factors in Europe at the time. Even though most of the areas of Europe, as we would think of it now, are being occupied by pagan groups, and more will become occupied by schismatics such as Arians, and the Nestorians move over into Persia. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So by 492, not 20 years later, Saint Gelasius begins to define the Pope's role and as the universal head of the church. Now, one of the things that happens, because the Roman diocese is basically the only one on the Western front, all of the churches that kind of spring up around Rome at that time begin to think of Rome as its mother church. And it does this a lot in comparison to the other heretical, especially the Arian groups that were already infiltrating into what we might call the German and Frankish areas. And so this is part of where the attitude, so to speak, of Rome being the mother of churches starts to develop. You're getting into a point where time and distance are becoming an enemy of unity. Just the distance from Rome to Constantinople, that doesn't sound that bad right now. What's that, like a 3-hour plane trip? Right? But then that was weeks to months. More like months, more like not. Unless you had to travel by land, then it could be years, right? So it's not like it is now where it's like, oh, I have a problem with somebody, I can call them on the phone and we can get over it real quick. It was an issue. So anytime you have two groups that have a distance that over time can lead to changes in the way things are being done, can lead to a sense of like division. You do it this way, we do it that way, right? And things like that exist all over the place. Some people are like, okay, in the north, we call it pop. You go down south, it's soda, unless you're in Georgia, and then it's a Coke. Everything Coke. What kind of Coke you want?
California.
Everything's Coke. California's that way too. See? So, that's a minor thing to talk about, but it's just an example of how the distance and time can allow for that kind of divergence to occur. I got to give myself more of a timer, else I'm going to just battle on forever. Okay. So normally what I would have is a TV or the monitor here so I could show you guys some things a little easier over time to make it's good to have something visual. especially when somebody's describing something, so it's not quite so bland, but unfortunately, you'll have to forgive me. I couldn't make my PowerPoint program work properly, and I just ran out of time. So,
Eric, did you talk last week about the early spread of Christianity and why Rome is so important and as opposed to some of the others? And I mean, you're talking about the separation, the distance, but and that's true.
Mm.
You know, I like that perspective, but you know, Rome, you're calling it, they're start beginning to recognize themselves as the universal head of the church because of that distance, but distance from what? I mean, did you go all the way back there to the first century and how where the patriarchal sees were established?
I described that
Oh,
to some extent last time, but we talked about that in depth in a different lecture,
right.
in a different lecture previous to this.
Okay, so I'm
So
looking at it.
I'm trying to limit it to, so to speak, the
You're going
relative
big picture, you're going
perspective.
from narrow.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, this big picture.
And so, and a lot of those things that you're talking about, we'll get a chance to discuss to some degree, but I'm gonna say it as a caveat again. There's so much information in this 500-year period that I can't possibly describe it all. So I'm really just trying to hit the highlights so we can kind of see the trajectory, even if we don't understand everything. So what happens is after the fall of Rome, it forces the church, the Catholic Church, to be a little more dynamic, which also leads to them getting more involved in the political sphere, the national sphere, and that has its own effects. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But in this time period, we're still in the period of the ecumenical councils. So there's debate back and forth about certain things. And the Roman Church has more or less interest or influence on different ones. So we'll kind of catch that up as we go along. So Saint Gelasius starts defining through his writings and his discussions with Constantinople about his opinion on how Rome is the universal head of the church. Not long after that, somewhere around 496, Anastasius II baptizes the Frankish king Clovis into Catholicism, marking the beginnings of Catholic France. France, as a country, still considers itself to be Catholic. So, 1,500 years later, that's still a fact. Now, obviously, France has become much more secular in the modern period, but the people of France as a whole are still Catholic.
Well, at this time, did they refer to themselves as the Catholic Church?
The United Church.
They
Church of
probably
Rome.
wouldn't have, I don't know if we've hit the point where they are actually calling themselves Catholic in specific, but I'm just trying to keep it simple by referring to
They
that.
would have been.
But the term Catholicism and Catholic, I think, comes up a little bit
So
later.
France became affiliated with the Church of Rome,
Yes,
not the Roman Catholic Church as we know it today.
Yeah.
I think that's the
Correct.
distinction. Yeah.
yes, that would be
The Church
correct.
of Rome then, the
We're
Christian
still
Church in
Union,
Rome.
So it's
We're in
it is
commune,
important
and that's
distinction.
what I'm trying to,
Yeah.
I don't know if everybody quite understands,
Well, I'll
and-
develop the differences.
but you're gonna
over
talk
time.
about that next.
Over time, we'll develop those particular differences, but just to keep it simple, just calling it, they consider themselves a continuity from now until all the way back then. So we'll just take it for granted and go from there for a minute. But why this is important is because Clovis is the first European Catholic leader. Up until then, it's practically all Arian heresy that's within the Germano-Frankic group,
Except for the Byzantine Empire.
the Germano-Frankic group,
Yeah.
who occupies most of this. All right, Matt, this is actually a little bit less larger than I want it to be, but I won't hold it against you, Keith. But anyway,
They were much smaller. There was a lot more.
yeah, here's Italy, right? And the Germano-Frankics kind of come like this. The Goths kind of come like this, and they make up a huge portion of the area that is outside of Italy, which is where Rome resides.
Hey, Eric, what about the Slavs? Were they Aryan descendants or were they,
Slavs were with the Avars and were pagans.
Yeah, they were all pagans.
They
And
weren't around.
We'll get to that. We'll get there. So This map actually right here shows essentially the area that Charlemagne conquers and takes over that will later be a part of what we call the Holy Roman Empire. So that's the divisions you see there are a little bit earlier than what we're talking about, but the important part is which people group they're dealing with. So, where are we at? So St. John the First, around 500 AD, makes several trips to Constantinople and dies as a martyr after being captured and treated poorly by the Ostrogoths. That same Ostrogoth king that kills him is the one who instates the next pope after that, Saint Felix III. And this creates divisions to a certain extent within the body politic of Rome, because the Roman people there are not very happy about the influence that this Ostrogoth king has upon the popes. The next one after that, Boniface II, is the first Germanic pope. He's chosen from amongst the body of people that were from the Germanic people. Chosen by Saint Felix as his successor, which basically means he was chosen by the leader of the Ostrogoths. 533, the first pope to choose a new name when assuming a bishopric, which is, I think, worth noting. Up until then, it had been the common factor to use your real name, your baptismal name. Not long after that, Saint Agapetus attempts to dissuade the Byzantine emperor from attacking Italy, which was owned by the Ostrogoths. And this is important because the emperor doesn't listen. And they invade Italy and basically take over the southern half of the boot.
They take over all of it.
Well, almost all of it.
No, they do take over all of it. It's the Lombards come in later, but they do take all.
Okay. I'm not gonna argue with you over, I can.
I gotta stand up for Saint Justinian, man.
Whatever. Anyway, what matters is the Byzantines take over a huge portion of this area and essentially reestablish their power over Rome and the Bishop of Rome. And so this begins a period in which the election of the Pope is tied to the agreement of the emperor in the East. And this goes on for a little while. They take over the land basically owned by the Ostrogoths. Vigilius, 537 to 555 AD, the first Byzantine Pope, was arrested by Justinian and died on the way back to Rome. There's a lot of times the popes don't last that long. During his reign of John III, Justinian dies and wars begin in the Balkans between the Avars, the Persians, and the Arabs, and the Lombard invasion of Italy occurs. Approximately 570 is when Muhammad is born. Within 30 years, he has his visions, and we see the birth of Islam as an entity. So later on, the Lombard conflict causes a delay in the confirmation as Pope by the Byzantine Emperor for approximately 11 months. And this is part of where you'll see, if you can dig into it a little bit more, you'll see there's a bit of frustration on the part of the popes that they're still being tied to the Eastern emperor's, authority, when they are the ones who are all the way over here doing all the work and fighting against the heresies all over Europe. Pelagius II, and later on about 590, unsuccessfully attempts to get the Franks to invade Lombardy and died of the bubonic plague that struck Rome in 590. So the Franks, looking at our map here, Lombardy has the northern portion of Italy. It's part of the peninsula, parts of it will later become Milan. And the Franks own a great portion of the European area. So, next up, Saint Gregory the First, known as the Great throughout the Catholic circles, somewhere around 590 to 604, famously converted the British Anglo-Saxon, who was beloved for his willingness to feed the poor, as well as being attributed with creating Gregorian chant. He also does a great amount of reformation within what later becomes the Roman Catholic Church in Rome. And part of that is restructuring the way that the priests are supposed to interact with the bishops in terms of authority. And he also spends a great deal of time talking about the papal claims to universal authority over the rest of the church.
What was changed with that?
What's that?
What was changed with that authority?
What do you mean in terms of the universal
like-
authority?
No, like in the relationship between the priests and the bishops was like,
He tightens the reins on autonomy.
oh,
That's the big thing that he does. There's actually a quote that I've got back here in the back portion. If my fingers work right. That is from a book called The Orthodox Church by Timothy Ware, who later on becomes known as Metropolitan Callistos Ware. And it gives a description of the way that the church kind of organized itself as a whole. Up until, later on when there's some more developments, but it's in contrast to the papal authority concept. The Orthodox Church is thus a family of self-governing churches. It is held together not by a centralized organization, not by a single prelate wielding power over the whole body, but by a double bond of unity in the faith and communion in the sacraments. This decentralized system of independent local churches has the advantage of being highly flexible and easily adapted to changing conditions. But the economia, so to speak, of the local parish priest had more leeway before the Gregorian reforms. That seems to be the major thing that he did. But that's also kind of fine tune it would seem, toward this idea of the Pope as the universal head of the church. So all the authority would flow down from him. So of course he would have more say so in the, local parish.
Most of the popes here, like the ones that are canons that are, classified here as saints, are they also canonized in our church? Because this is pre-schism. Do they also count as saints in our church?
Some of them.
Most of them should.
I think most of, most if not all.
Most of them. And this is also the notations on whether they were a saint or not is from the Catholic perspective. So from what I can tell, most of the time they're up until the schism fairly the same. But in specific to the popes, these are the ones that they consider saints or not saints amongst the popes.
Which one's Saint Gregory?
I'm sorry, what?
Which one's Saint Gregory the Great?
Yes.
Yeah. It's also noted that he did say that anyone who called themselves a universal bishop, was wrong and would have been of the devil. I forget the exact quote from the road, but, it was in response to the Pope of Alexandria saying that he wanted that the Pope of Rome was like the universal bishop, and said anyone who called themselves a universal bishop would be wrong, and because there is no universal bishop, that all people.
Well, I would agree with that personally, but unfortunately later popes don't agree with either of us.
Well, I just thought it was because you're talking about how it kind of set the stage for the Pope, so it's
It's
important. to
it's
say
part
that
of what sets the
Gregory
stage. It's a consolidation of power that later on will be made use of, right? And again, the people that we're talking about here, we got 1-2 sentences to work with. So we don't really get to dig into them as individuals. Most of them don't leave diaries for us to really dig into either, to find out exactly how they felt versus whatever. And the papacy also has a sort of a strange leeway in it, in that one pope can, disavow the teaching of another pope, and then the next pope can come back and just turn it back on. And that type of disunity is not completely unnormal in history, but I think we'll see over time that this type of problem becomes more and more evident as we get farther along. Saint Boniface, Boniface III improves the papal election process. This is essentially where we see the College of the Cardinals as an idea starting to become important. Because how are you supposed to get a bishop? They're brought in by other bishops, same way that a metropolitan is elevated by a metropolitan, that kind of stuff, right? The popes are developing this idea that they don't really want to be beholden to the Eastern emperor or necessarily any other emperor in order to decide who's going to be the pope. So they start defining the ways in which the pope should be elected. Unfortunately for them, that doesn't change the facts on the ground. The Byzantines are still the ones who are giving the check mark on things. And then later on, as we'll see, they kind of get snared into the trap of having the Holy Roman emperors determine who's Pope too. Sometimes with popularity and other times not. Not long after that, St. Boniface IV remade the abandoned Pantheon and church in Rome into a church and oversaw the establishment of the British Church, which goes on to be one of the most successful conversions in the history of either one, of either the East or the West. 610, Islam is born when Muhammad begins his revelations. And we can talk more on why we can talk on a different session about why I give air quotes to all that. But this is the point at which Islam is born and it starts to radiate throughout the Arabian Peninsula. Like I said, we'll talk more about that at a different time. I can only kind of give you the cliff notes of that because that's an entire series by itself. Interestingly enough, the next Pope, Saint Adeodatus, however you want to pronounce it, it was one of the few popes who was elected directly to the papacy from the priesthood. And later on, there's another pope who doesn't even get to be a priest. They just send him straight to being a pope. It's interesting how that can happen, right? So Boniface V next helps organize the British Church and converts English King Edwin of Northumbria. And one of the common important factors about this kind of thing is when, especially throughout the medieval period, but even back at this point, if you conquer or convert the leader of a group, the whole group comes with on a whole, right? Sometimes people don't want to listen, but for the most part, if you got the king to convert, you got everybody to convert. So when he converted the king in Northumbria, he converts all the people in Northumbria. So it's a pretty good score for the Christian church. Excuse me. So in the 600s, there's a heresy that comes up called monothelitism, which is a reaction to the previous ecumenical council. Now let me find my spot on this so I can quote it to you properly.
It's a attempt by Heraclius to unite with the Orientals.
Exactly. It is an argumentative attempt to try to bring them within the fold. So where are we at? Monophysitism was the reason the Fourth Ecumenical Council Synod met at Chalcedon in 451. This synod issued a decree which both reaffirmed and the pronouncements of the Third Synod, and that the Lord is one and the same, perfect in Godhead as in manhood, and that the two natures exist in the God-man. It is also laid down that these two natures are united in a single person of the Logos, not only without distinction and without separation, but without confusion and without change, as well as the one nature suffering neither annihilation nor alteration by the other. And in a different class, excuse me, we went through all the ecumenical councils and talked more about this. And kind of where these ideas came from. But the ecumenical council's purpose was never to specifically write down something that will describe everything about, Jesus Christ and his relationship with the Godhead. It was only to try to describe what you shouldn't say about it, right? You shouldn't say that the divinity of Christ completely overwhelmed the manhood of Christ. That's not correct. You shouldn't say that Christ was a creature and not part of the eternal Godhead, right? So it's more important, I think, to try to look at those things in terms of what they're trying to describe that it's not, as opposed to what it specifically is in terms of the exactitude of the language, because understanding three persons in one hypostasis is very difficult. But they came up with terminology to rein in rampant opinions, I guess is the best way to put it.
They call that apophatic theology.
Yes, you were taking away as opposed to adding to. So the Fifth Ecumenical Council is in 553. The decisions of the Synod of Chalcedon were not, however, universally accepted. The Armenians considered the decree of Chalcedon verged on Nestorianism, rejected it at a local synod in which met in Echmadzin. I don't pronounce it well, I'm sure. Amongst those, the Copts of Egypt, their neighbors, the Abyssinians, and the Syrian Jacobites likewise preferred to break away from the Catholic Church, read the whole church at the time, and to found schismatic monophysite communities rather than admit two separate natures of Christ. A doctrine which they considered to be cutting into the person of the God-man and returning to the teaching of Nestorius. So Nestorius is an interesting character. I don't want to dig into it too much, but I want it to be understood that after Nestorius was decreed anathema, the people who were what we would call Nestorians primarily started to leave the empire, get out of the Byzantine zone. And the place they landed to immediately was Persia. And then later on, they kind of moved south and they established a place there in the north of Saudi Arabia where the trade lines are. And some people say that this guy, Muhammad, heard a lot of Nestorian ideas, combined that with a bunch of other ideas, and cobblepot together a philosophy. But, hold on. Like I said, we'll go through the history of that at a different point. What are you gonna say?
No, it's not.
Okay. So the heretical opinion held by Nestorius and the recognition of two natures in one person, which was the Orthodox teaching of the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. The Emperor Justinian the Great, following the now established custom, convened the Fourth Ecumenical Synod at Constantinople in 553. This synod condemned the theological works of the Nestorian, hoping thereby to conciliate the monophysites and to persuade them to return to the universal church. So, one second, there's a quote I want to read to you. Okay. So, John the Fourth, 640 to 642, clashed with the Irish and British churches over the date of Easter and condemned the monothelitism heresy, which had started to become relevant in the Eastern Church. Pushed on by the emperor for various reasons. One of them may have been to try to smooth relations. One of them may have been something else. I'm not going to debate that. That's a whole other, story. Interestingly enough, he was the only pope who was from Jerusalem, where he was a bishop and was forced to flee when it was conquered by the Muslims. And the Muslims push out, now here on the map on the back here. This is a description of the expansion of the Muslim world. All right. So this dark brown area over here, this peninsula is the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. Just in case you guys didn't know, I'm sure you do. That's where Muhammad first started to spread Islam at the end of his sword. And he lasts basically from 622 to 632. The short story on that is he attempted to capture 5 or 7 cities. He only captured 5. And then in 632, he dies from strange sources say that he was poisoned by the wife he had just personally conquered. There's some debate, but the general understanding is he wasn't that old. He mysteriously dies at about 632. After that begins the Rashidun Caliphate. It spreads out of the Saudi Arabian Peninsula up into the, Persian, Iraqi zones, and then starts to move west, takes Jerusalem, and then moves off to the west and takes Cairo and Alexandria, and they push off. We'll talk about the end of the Caliphate in a moment. Around 661 is when they end their expansion there, but then the Umayyad takes over the scene, and they push off all over past all of North Africa, and then eventually make their way into southern Spain.
Whoa. So at the time, was this all Vandal like Vandal.
Yeah, Vandals,
It
Goths
was,
and such.
it was Eastern Roman, but
Oh, like
Saint
Justinian
Justinian took
back,
over.
That's right.
the Vandals at this point.
Yeah.
So they got conquered.
Well, this was all Roman at that point, no matter what.
And then,
The
yeah,
Vandals
then-
start over here. But anyway, the important part is they cut across all of northern Africa and then make their way to Spain. They enter into Spain and start conquering Spain.
they conquer like 90%.
Not a very long time. The Umayyad Caliphate lasts barely 100 years. So we'll dig into that a little bit more in a minute. But I wanted to show you that so you can see that right after Muhammad dies, they immediately start moving toward the Byzantine Empire. And that's part of why I want to do a different series where we talk about this, because there's a lot of interesting information there. And there's way too much to just go off in tangents on. We'll be here all night. But they start moving north, and then later on they capture Anatolia, and then eventually they make it and conquer the rest of the Grecian peninsula and Constantinople. Well, that sad state is still in the future at this point. So, but I wanted to point out, I think it's worth noting that in terms of the monothelitism, the Pope was right. They resisted it. They were not treated well for it, but eventually it's part of the triumph of the Orthodox Church that this heresy was cast aside. Over time after that, Saint Eugene has a fight, essentially an argument with Constance II over monothelitism. Improved relationship with the Byzantines and the British Church developed through Saint Vitallion. Saint Agatho is credited with being part of the main things that convinced the Eastern Church to reject the monothelitism. The next pope confirms the policies of Agatho, and then not long after that, Saint Benedict II convinces the Byzantine emperor to rule that the pope no longer needs to be confirmed by the emperor. And this is a major first step toward what we call the rise of the papacy. Now, the reason why the emperor seemed keen on doing that was because the Roman Church had been the bulwark against the monophysite heresy, right? So that leads to St. John V, who's the first pope elected without the approval of the emperor, but that isn't a permanent state. Later on, some of the other popes are still confirmed by the emperor, but for the most part, for a little while at least, they kind of have control of that. Well, right after this begins many contentious elections for who's going to be the pope, because now there's the final say isn't from outside, it's from inside. And when you have scarce resources, people get greedy, right? So you have the contentious election of Conan, who doesn't last that long. Saint Sergius, 687 to 701. This election caused bribes and violence in the papal estates as the two candidates vied for the bishopric. Because of all the nastiness that happens, they actually elect Sergius the First because he's considered to be a compromise between the factions. John the Sixth, not long after that, successfully persuades the Lombards to leave most of the Roman territories that they had taken. The borders kind of shift back and forth during that time period from excursions and fighting. Constantine, just called Constantine the First, 708 to 715, one of the last popes from the Byzantine Empire. He improved relations with Emperor Justinian II, and during his reign, the Umayyad Caliphate conquers Spain and Portugal. So they spread from here to here within that 7-year period, which is tremendous. And this causes, of course, a problem for the European front, because now you have the invading Muslims essentially at the gate of France. And this is an important problem. After this, they start taking on more seafarer against the general continent of Europe, and the Muslims start to take over things, start to attempt to go after Crete and Sicily and other islands. All right. So moving on, Saint Gregory clashed with the new Byzantine emperor over the iconoclasm controversy. Now here's another one, right? The final ecumenical council is about the debate, if you like to call that, over icons. There's the iconoclasts who are against them, and what they call the iconocules who are for them, right? Now the history of icons within the church begins with simple artwork that you can find still, like Father George or Father Jim saw in Rome, that you can still see. The ichthos, the fish symbol, you know, the plain cross, things like that. That's where the iconography gets its start in Christian art. And then by this point, it has become a full-fledged industry, right? Icons are very common. The churches are adorned with them. They have become very important to the worship of the church. Now, some people say it's because of the pressures of the people who are on the borderland with the caliphate. Now, in Islam, any type of image is illicit. That's why they get so upset when people draw pictures of Muhammad, because they're against any type of image, let alone one of their prophet. Especially if you make them look bad, they hate that even more, right?
There's also some earthquakes that helped influence the decision to have prophet.
Oh, sure. There's more to it. This is one example of the pressures that are causing this to become a popular idea. And
Can I just say something kind of interesting that I noticed in Turkey when I was just there?
please do.
Went to Hagia Sophia, the crown jewel of Christianity at the time. And it's been turned into a mosque.
Yeah.
It was a mosque, it was a church, then a mosque, and then a museum. Now, last couple of years, it's been a mosque again. But they still have the iconography from that time period in the 3rd century. That's there, and you can see it. It's beautiful. However, have you guys been there? Yeah.
Made me sick.
I mean, it's the saddest day.
When you see what they did,
It's the
yeah.
saddest day of our travels. I mean, I hated it. So it's a mosque, and down below you can't go because it's a mosque. They weren't worshiping there. But what I've noticed in these mosques, they're really trying to eradicate Christianity in Turkey. However, there's a element of it that they have. I mean, it must kill them, but people come to visit this. I mean, there's
Yeah.
I think eventually they might try to eradicate it all, but they make a lot of money from tourism. So they visit. This top part is a museum, but when they worship, there are some of those images in the dome, particularly, and on the columns that hold up the dome, where they have screens that come down during the time of their prayer. Because when they pray, they can have words. They have Arabic words written. I think it's words of the Quran, maybe. But they aren't allowed to have faces. So they cover the faces of if angels have faces, they've either scratched them out or they have screens that come down to cover it during their times of worship. For that reason, because they don't depict imagery
Any imagery.
like this.
And part of the reason that, from my
It's very
research,
sad.
part of the reason why they didn't plaster over where they scraped all that stuff off was because it's actually a sign of their victory. Because they've converted that into a mosque. Here's the trophies, so to speak, of our victory and changing it into a mosque. So it's,
I also heard that whenever they try to put plaster on the walls, it just fall off.
well, I don't know anything about that. I'd have to go there and test that myself. But I'm just saying that if you, other places, other churches like in and around Jerusalem, they did the same kind of thing. Rather than plaster over their wall and repaint it something else, they leave the scraped up stuff there. Just like the many emperors in Rome who would find a bust of somebody they didn't like, and they didn't destroy the whole thing, they just break the nose off. Because it's a symbol of how I want. Cut off your nose, right? So, I want to talk a little bit about the Ecumenical Council. Oh, actually, there's page number on this. Good job. It's on page 11, so it's like the last page. Iconoclasm, cause of a prolonged struggle lasting almost half a century. There has been much scholarly dispute as to its origins. Some have seen in its influence the Mohammedan East, with its ban on human images, on an attempt at a certain psychological compromise with Islam. Others, the first revolt against the church of a secular culture inspired by the emperors, and a struggle for the liberation of art from the church. Now, I pulled that from a book called Historic Road by Alexander Schmemann. If you can find stuff by Schmemann, you should read it. It's worth it. Okay. So I got another quote from him in here. The ferment soon reached the Emperor Leo and immediately took on an imperial dimension. Leo openly sided with the iconoclasts, and in the year 730 published a decree against icons. The patriarch who had not submitted to him was removed and replaced by Anastasius, who was sympathetic to iconoclasm. Shortly thereafter, the first blood was shed in a skirmish between the mob and soldiers who, at the emperor's command, had taken down from the Calopratian gate a revered icon of Christ. So this is a big, huge gate, and right above the top of it was a large icon of Christ. It's part of the reason that was put there is because people are entering into that part of the city. You have to look up and see Christ. And I'm going to make a note before I continue. During this time period, especially after the fall of Rome, the union, so to speak, the harmony between the church, the Orthodox Church, the Eastern Church, and the emperors, specifically the idea of how governance should be done and how, people should be acting and what it means to be Orthodox, starts to become a lot tighter. Like they start working more hand in glove. All right. Originally, this was a continuation of the position, so to speak, that Constantine the Great occupied within the church. He called for councils. He tried to clarify heresies, things like that. So that kind of continues on, but they become tighter over time as the Byzantine Empire starts to develop. And around this time,
Well, especially also with the fall of Antioch, Alexandria, and Jerusalem, the other patriarchs that were taken over by the Muslims helps contribute to it as well.
oh, sure. But the important part within the paradigm was that the church and the state essentially become more and more one entity in terms of how they work together, as opposed to the church runs the church and the emperor runs the empire. And while the emperor, we discussed last time, taken on the concept of Pontifex Maxim, is the byway between the governance and the church, right? And they were meant to work in harmony, but harmony is not the same thing as walking in lockstep.
So how would that work? Like, because the one emperor, like the iconoclast emperor, it was trying to get rid of all the icons and everything, having it.
Well, that's part of what we're talking about, is that he made that decision himself and applied that to the empire.
So
And he used people like this Anastasius as the patriarch of Constantinople to push that onward. And like we're saying, in a skirmish between the mob and the soldiers. So in Constantinople, you had lay people, who had always done it that way, and that was the part of the essence of how the church is spiritual. This was taken away. They don't appreciate it, and so they fight back. At the emperor's command, they took down the Calopratian gate icon. Several persons were killed, and in Greece, opposition to the new movement took the form of a political uprising. The entire West condemned iconoclasm, again, unanimously. Constantine, the emperor at the time, pursued his iconoclastic policy systematically, carrying out in the space of a few years a purge of the episcopate. And in 753, he summoned a council at Constantinople at which icons and the veneration of icons were condemned. Having secured the council's approval, Constantine put its decision into practice with fire and sword. Many of the names of the new martyrs, as the church entitled them, have remained in our calendar from that decade of blood, 762 to 75. And this is according to the Historic Road by Schmemann. So the iconoclasm issue isn't resolved until 787 at the Ecumenical Council, when the icons are reinstated as a right and proper form of the Orthodox worship. And now we call that the victory of Orthodoxy. And there's a triumph of Orthodoxy, and there's a Sunday that.
The first Sunday of Lent.
There you go, that we celebrate that every year.
Question.
Yes, sir. Ma'am.
So, I understand that, like, with Islam influencing kind of that idea of iconoclasm, but what's the actual like, theological reason that they had to say, like, was it they deemed it as like idolatry or?
I haven't read it enough, like the council itself, to be exactly sure, but if I had to guess, I would imagine they're the people within the church that were looking back to the Old Testament in terms of iconography. The major argument that is made in the council, if I remember correctly, is that Christ coming into the universe physically, taking on human form, when he dies, and is resurrected, he doesn't just redeem humans. He's redeeming the entirety of creation. And so, A, Christ came in a human form, so it's reasonable to be able to depict him as a human. And B, all the things on earth have essentially been redeemed by the Creator. And so there's nothing in specific about things on earth that are bad for us in that way. And especially since the icons are meant to be as much teaching tools as they are, I hate to say it like this, worshiping tools. If you look at
Windows to heaven.
Windows to heaven, it's a visible,
We don't worship them.
exactly, yeah, it's an element of our worship, but we don't worship them.
Transport it to
Yeah.
where we want to be.
It's a visible expression of an invisible reality. So if you look at a lot of the icons upstairs, you'll notice that they're very much teaching icons, right? There's things there to learn about the Gospels, about Old Testament stuff, about Christ's passion and his resurrection, and everything on there means something. The colors, even the style is done in a certain way on purpose. It's not just because 1200 years ago, that's the way people drew. Now we do it that way. You know, it's because there's a purpose to it, so that it's guiding you toward information, but you're not getting confused into trying to be like, that's exactly what St. Paul looked like. I can tell.
I think there was some issue with people utilizing these icons, not just to help guide them in their worship, but they actually started to worship them. And so much so that they would start even consuming them.
Yes, that was the
Like-
thing I was gonna
like,
bring up.
You know, we go and we receive Holy Communion, the body and blood of Christ. They feel like icons had that same spiritual element or that transformative element, so they like eat it.
Yeah, they
Keep
scrape
off
the
the
paint.
lines off.
Yeah.
So there was, the issue was on the worship and against the second commandment of God.
Mhm.
Thou shalt not worship any graven images. So that was a big part of it as well, but there were some bad practices that were happening. And I know that the Catholic Church, they address a lot of the stuff from Rome, not in a malicious way,
Exactly.
but because there were some bad practices. Same thing with marriage.
Mhm.
Roman Catholic churches, Eastern Catholic priests are married, but not Roman Catholic priests anymore because of some bad practices. And so they just make sweeping blanket decisions. And I think this is probably what happened here, because they don't want to, beat the horse. What do you call it?
Well,
Beat it to it. So I mean, the Pope's just like, you know what? It got to my desk, then this is the way it's going to be. I'm tired of this. Boom, sweeping. It's all you're all going to follow this now. And I think these are how some of these decisions, but ultimately I think it was because of this concern about worship and how that icons were being utilized by the parishioners. It was harmful. This is not what we do. And I don't know if priests were allowing that or if people just started doing this, or the Pope caught wind of it. And he's just like, then we're done. I'm removing all of that. It's bad practice. rather than teach it and, you know, educate and things, you know, they go like, that's what I think happens in history sometimes, especially with the Pope of Rome. They made these sweeping blankets. I mean, he has a big, his flock is huge.
Exactly.
And and you might probably have some some priests that were, again, probably not maliciously, but they maybe overemphasized the purpose of icons and people took it wrong, and so.
Well, I
I
don't
know
want
that helps.
I don't want to sound contrary, but I'm going to give the Catholics their one up on this. It was the iconoclasm controversy started in Constantinople, and the popes stood against
Bishop of Rome is right.
the Bishop of Rome stood up against the iconoclastic movement. So 2 times they were in the right spot, doing it the right way. And this also lends to the attitude of the Roman church at the time, that they were something important in the church. They were bringing something extra, so to speak. So it just kind of contributes to that kind of thinking. So that's why you can kind of see the line getting drawn as we get closer and closer to the schism. So 787, we resolved the iconoclast issue. Part of what happens, just as an aside, because of that one, is there's a lot of discussion about repentance and how to return into the church. And the idea of rechrisimation becomes the standard to bring people back in after they have lapsed or they were part of the iconoclasm or that. What were you gonna say, Caleb?
I was just gonna point out that another important development during that time is 756. Pepin.
Oh, we're getting there, man.
Okay.
He's gotta be a little patient.
But it's a little before that.
We're getting there.
It's different.
Well, I was restating, 787 is when the ecumenical council happened. So, what begins to happen is, the popes also, while they are occupied with trying to defend what they consider to be orthodoxy, are also besieged on all sides with various problems, not the least of which is the Lombards, who had taken over most of northern Italy, was capturing portions of central Italy that they didn't want captured, getting real close to Rome. And so because the Byzantine emperor could not help him, they went to Pepin the Short, who was the king of the Franks.
Well,
What?
he was mayor at the time. He actually gets the king.
Yes. He gets crowned later, but calm down. He's the king of the Franks.
He becomes king because
What page are you on right now?
Page 3.
he gets the king dethroned to become.
So if you look at your little map, right, here's the boots. Going up north, where it's pinkish, it's kind of where Lombardy is, and the right. To the north of that is Pippin of Italy, or as we call him, Pepin the Short. Very influential and powerful man, the de facto leader of the Franks, until later on when the Pope, because he receives help from the Franks against the Lombards, crowns him as Pepin the First. And Pepin in response, say it nicely, in response, gives a certain portion of the Lombard land that they conquered back to the Pope, and this is where you see the establishment of the Papal States.
So does the Pope become sort of like a king or a duke or something?
He essentially becomes the ruler of the Papal States. So like a king, and this also later on when popes decide they can call ecumenical councils, it goes back to this kind of thing where he becomes the leader that eventually becomes equal to an emperor in terms of their ability to call for councils, determine bishops, things like that. But we're still working our way toward that time period. Haven't quite got there yet, but
At the formation, is it like something baffled to like the Franks?
No.
well, now that's a good point. I'm glad you brought it up because while they're not directly a vassal, and the difference between a vassal and a friendly city state is essentially, do I have to give you money in order to still be a part of your vassalship? No, he's given the land outright. But a relationship begins between him and the Franks, starting with Pepin and moving forward.
Well, not only that, but the Lombards still exist in northern Italy.
Yeah, they didn't get rid of all. They
They're
just
not gone. They're still in control of a lot.
they pushed them, they defeated them, pushed them to the side a little bit, and gave some of the territory to the Pope in central Italy. Well, to the church. He didn't hand him over the, didn't, here's the deed, sign it.
Yeah.
Pope. Um. Okay. So this is when it starts to get a little more interesting. Next up, St. Paul the First, brother of Stephen the Second, the previous pope who asked Pepin to help him out. Both of whom are part of the powerful Orsini family, and this is a time period in which certain families become very important in the Italy, Venice, Milan zone. And this will become even more important later in the medieval period, when these families basically become contemporary in terms of power with a king, because they're merchants. They were able to make use of the supply lines and the trade lines to make money, and that's what set them apart, their family apart from others, along with, you know, vindictiveness, selfishness, and cruelty. So Saint Gregory the Third, last pope that's not from Europe for the next 1200 years, and the pope who's not from Europe at that point was Francis when he was elected. He's from Argentina. So at this point, the Umayyad Caliphate has conquered all of Spain, and they're trying to push their way into the Frankish European zone. Sorry. There you go. I lost my spot. Sorry. Okay, here on. The Umayyad Caliphate attempts to invade France, only to be defeated at the Battle of Tours in 732. And this battle is very important because the Muslims never really get a chance to try to make their way into Europe proper after that. And this is also, this sets the stage for the later Reconquista, which is the people of Spain pushing the Muslims back out. And that continues on until
Oh, that's 1478.
thereabout. Most people put it at 1492, but
Yeah,
close enough,
Yeah.
right? So for another 700 years, they're underneath the Islamic Caliphate.
It goes back and forth.
Yeah, there's a lot, but that essentially 700 years. The Reconquista gradually pushes them back south. The way they came in is the way they go back. Part of the reason they're able to do that, if you look at the geography of Spain, especially when you get near France, there's a lot of mountainous areas. And so it becomes a lot easier to defeat a large army if you play it out.
They just like give up though, like you.
No,
once
no,
they-
Eventually they gave up and went home.
They
700
fight
years
tooth-
later.
They fight tooth and nail.
Yeah.
Especially
No,
in Morocco help.
Alright.
No, with the Muslims when they got to the Andorra Mountains, or what's the mountain range between France and Spain?
Charles Martel has to fight the Muslims off there.
Yeah, he beats them.
He like it's not like they just gave up. Like
No, they showed up with what they thought was the
Maybe
best
like-
stuff. So, okay,
Charles Martel, but what?
so now the Orsini family, to tell you exactly, give you an idea of how powerful they were. Besides St. Paul the First and his brother Stephen the Second, produces 5 popes, and 34 cardinals. That's a lot of tangible power with the geopolitical sphere. So Stephen the Third became pope after a violent dispute over the next candidate, which saw many rivals being blinded and having their tongues cut out, followed by imprisonment. Why blinded and have their tongues cut out, you might wonder. Because you're not supposed to be allowed to be a pope if you're maimed. So if I pluck your eye out and I take your tongue out, you can't do your job.
This was the typical way even for Eastern Roman emperors.
That's true. You're not supposed to be blinded or maimed if you're an emperor, so on and so forth. I think there's even rules about that with the bishopric now. Or maybe Father Jim can elaborate on that, but
Well, I know, I'm not sure about that, but I do know that, bishops are not canonically, supposed to travel by themselves. They need to have somebody, else, with them because, of their safety. You have to keep them alive.
Mm.
What do you do if you don't have, now, I mean, this is canonically, and this is, I mean, a church leader, especially the patriarchs, but now they're flying all over the place, and what do you do? They might.
right.
But, and it also has to do with the protection of what do you do if, there's an accidental murder or if there's.
Like a car
it's
crash or
fault
something.
or something, yeah, a car crash. And what do you do if your leader is in prison? All
Right.
of that happens sometimes too in,
Some of the popes
takeovers
actually got
of
in
their-
prison. And then they had to make decisions from there.
yeah, okay, maybe.
Um,
But I don't know about the maiming and, it makes sense to me.
I don't remember exactly. I think I remember reading somewhere that
It was a very.
in order to be a bishop, you had to be free of like obvious
You
deformities.
gotta
and
be
stuff
able
like
to
that.
lead.
Exactly. Yeah.
You gotta
It wasn't necessarily because it's like, you're no good because of that. It's just, you have to be able to perform the functions.
perform.
Okay. So. Pepin the Short helps them out. He gets
Can I
crowned.
just say something too?
Yes, sir.
I'm just, I'm interested. I mean, this is, I'm learning tons, but you know, this, the power of these families that would produce popes and cardinals and these ties with world leaders. I wonder if this is what led to, because we were talking about marriage and married priests, and now we don't have married priests in the Church of Rome. Because part of the issue was that they were getting a lot of power and that, and land and material wealth. And it was passing down through generation to generation. It didn't become, it wasn't seen as the churches anymore, but those families saw it as theirs.
Right.
And so there was some corruption taking place with the families who were supposed to be religious leaders.
Yes.
And so I think it was Gregory in the 11th century or sometime around then that just said, you know what, we're done with the having popes have that kind of temptation. So there is no more married. You don't have any more
Right.
married priests, and you're not going to ever have a pope that has that problem
Right.
with
And
marriage and with families and cardinals and.
I don't remember which particular,
It was
I'm
like
just-
Gregory the Seventh.
yeah, I don't remember which particular
Yeah,
pope
it's
said it,
Gregory
but
the 7th, it was.
previous to that, they had,
There was also just a big movement in France with like
Yes. Because-
monastics that come out.
but previous to that, they had the same program, so to speak, as the Eastern Orthodox. As long as you were married before you were ordained, it was acceptable. And then at a certain point, and you know, near the Middle
I
Ages.
just wonder if it may have started back into.
Well, we're getting
This
into
is
the
very
time frame
tempting.
where
There's a lot of temptation.
this becomes very
that
important.
age.
So,
About this, where like they were like exactly how you said they were passing down, and I remember, I can't remember what the exact like context was that one of these men died, he only had daughters, so like a whole bunch of churches got inherited by a woman. So a woman was like running all these churches, and the Pope, and it was like, no, we can't have women running a church, and they're just like,
Probably a lot of
This
elements.
period,
I don't know, but
from
hey.
here to like the 1000s is very, very.
there's a lot of stuff going on here, so let me continue on and we can diverge after the thing's done. Okay, so we're getting close to 800. Pepin the Short's done things for the church, Roman Church. The Roman Church has done things for Pepin the Short by crowning him as the first king of the Franks.
First Carolingian, the mayor of
If
it.
you want to call it for Carolingian, go right ahead. We'll get to that.
Look,
First
look,
king of the
that-
Franks.
No, because the Merovingians were.
Let him give his presentation.
Slow me down. Running out of time, that's the problem. Okay, so we're talking about the Orsini family. Stephen III became pope after a violent dispute. Now, Adrian I, not long after that, 770s. During this time, Charles, who will later be called Charlemagne, and his brother Carlan, sons of Pepin the Short, invade Lombardy. Carlan dies, leaving Charlemagne after the invasion. He dies, leaving Charlemagne as the owning all the land and becoming his full successor. 800 AD, famously on Christmas Day, Saint Leo II crowns Charlemagne as the new Western Roman Emperor. At the time, they don't call him the Holy Roman Emperor; they just call him the Western Roman Emperor. Later on, the term Holy Roman Empire gets applied to a specific geographical mass, and the Roman emperors are chosen by the Pope. They're all they're not all from the same parentage. But at this point, it becomes a little bit more of a inheritance sort of circumstance. Not long after that, Saint Stephen the Third crowned Charlemagne's son Louis the Pious as emperor, and this essentially establishes the tangible power of the popes. They're now the kingmaker. They determine who the emperor is, not the other way around. So now we've taken the original constraints, we've turned them on their heads. Not long after that, the Saint Paschal I crowns and anoints Louis' son Lair. Paschal resists the opposition to this crowning by blinding and decapitating the perpetrators of those who tried to stop it. So now we're getting to a point where the powers that be are having a lot, even though the Pope decided to put in a position where he crowns people, they still end up having to pay lip service to the foreign powers that be that aided them. So, as an example, Eugene II, 824, candidate chosen by the Franks. This is actually when the Muslims first start to invade Sicily. Gregory III was going to saw the end of iconoclasm, negotiated between the Frankish emperor and his sons, leading to the end of the Frankish Carolingian Empire. Not long after that, in the around 847, Saint Leo III fortifies the walls of Rome and organizes Italian armies that defeat the Muslims at the Battle of Ostia. And it's the first time that a pope leads a military into a war. So at this point, like I said, they've started to merge the concept of who the pope is very much with who the state is, which is an interesting contraposition to what's happening in the Byzantine Empire, where the state and the emperor and the church are kind of unifying together as a one entity.
I don't know if it's described later. Is the donation of Constantine anywhere in this? Because that's another important development during this time.
Probably. Hold on. Benedict doesn't really do much. We're gonna move on a little faster so we can get toward the schism. John VIII tried to deal with the growing Muslim invasions of Italy, assassinated by his own clerics after being poisoned and clubbed to death. The next one had a good relationship with the English King Alfred the Great and is said to have gifted him a piece of the true cross. Saint Adrian is known as a saint primarily for helping the Italian peoples who were suffering from famine and war by giving away the food. Saint Stephen V alleviated suffering and famine caused by drought and locusts caused by famine and war. By giving the people out of his father's wealth because the papal treasury was empty. I was known to have redeemed slaves and repaired churches. Boniface was murdered to make way for another pope. Saint Stephen VI, best known for the cadaver trial, later imprisoned and strangled to death. So Formosus, who was just before that, intervened in a power struggle between Constantinople and France and controversially encouraged wars to depose an Italian king. What this leads to is what's known as the Cadaver Synod. Later on, they dig up his body, they put the robes on him, this is true, put him on the papal throne, and then they give him a trial, and they condemn his body to be beaten and thrown in the river.
Why would they beat it?
Just for good.
It's a symbol, man.
Just for funsies.
Everybody loves an effigy, right?
Maybe. Beat the death.
Stephen VI, who was the one that was best known for the cadaver trial, later imprisoned and strangled to death. It was Theodore II, who was only pope for 20 days, who pulled Formosus from the river and gave him a proper burial at the old St. Peter's Basilica. John IX, right after that, helps calm the chaos of the recent events, and he burned the records from the cadaver trial in order to, I guess, so we can just make it just in the past.
No one forgot it.
Let's see. Benedict V, around 900, saw Sicily captured by the Muslims after 70 years of attempts. And just for your geographical awareness, Sicily is right here at the end of the boot. So it makes a great staging point to attack Italy. So, but they were able to hold off the Muslims for 70 years until that point. Salmon, records. Now, this is when it starts to get really fun. Sergius II, 904 to 911, elected by the powerful ruler of Rome named Theophlact, who may have been related to him. This begins a period known as the Saeculum Obscurum. Refused to crown a Holy Roman Emperor and supported the Byzantine Emperor's fourth marriage. Supposedly had Leo, previous pope, strangled in prison and fathered illegitimate child with Theophlact's daughter, Morozia. Next pope, elected by Theophlact, the leader of Rome. Next pope had to deal with Muslims to attempt to invade Italy. He was also appointed by Theophlact. Next pope, John X, personally leads armies against the Muslim invasions of central Italy and fell out of favor with Morozia, Theophlact's daughter, and she had him imprisoned where he died. Now, at this point, Theophlact is moving off the scene, and his daughter Morozia becomes the most powerful person in Rome. So, next thing that happens is the next pope is chosen by her, and the next pope after that is chosen by her, and is known for his severe treatment of clergy who deviated from their morals. I didn't dig into that too much, but I think we can imagine what kind of people they're like. So John the 11th, the son of Morozia, became pope at about age 20, rumored to be the illegitimate child of Pope Sergius II. Morozia ousted from power by his brother Alberic, and they formed John the 11th, formed a congregation that would later cause reforms to the church. And so the next few popes are chosen by Alberic, chosen by Alberic, chosen by Alberic. Supported clergy reforms throughout Germany and France. That's good. Aegyptus II found his powers limited essentially to only internal church business because Alberic is not interested in him having any of the political power that he enjoyed before that. Now, around 955, John the 12th, considered one of the most morally depraved and controversial popes. He was an illegitimate son of Alberic, became ruler of Rome when his father died, and becomes pope as a teenager. Rules the church more as a king than a bishop, and was said to have turned the papal residence into a brothel. Rumored to have slept with scores of women, including his niece, and led wars to reclaim the lost papal state. He allied with King Otto of Germany, who he crowned as the Holy Roman Emperor Otto I. Otto I immediately turns around and lays siege to Italy. He was temporarily replaced by an anti-pope who fled when John returned and mutilated his enemies and made himself pope again, allegedly killed by an angry husband who caught John in the act with his wife.
That's a saint in the Catholic Church? Wow.
Not a saint.
What the?
Not a saint. If you don't see an ST in front of it, not a saint.
What's the anti?
Okay, an anti-pope is,
Another pope.
that's when somebody else says, that's an illegitimate pope, and they establish their own
Oh,
pope.
that's-
So Constantinople did that a couple of times.
That's like the statement.
Yeah, the
Oh.
French eventually do that several times. But remember, this list is from the current Roman Catholic Church's opinion of these
Okay.
people. So if it's not who they said was pope, they're essentially the anti-pope. Benedict V, 964, elected by the people of Rome, but against the wishes of Holy Roman Emperor Otto. So after 30 days, Otto deposes Benedict and exiles him to Germany, where he dies. Otto establishes the Holy Roman Empire as an official territory that would last 900 years. So I did forget about the
Donation to Constantine.
donation, yeah.
Yeah, that's basically at some point during the 700s,
Yeah.
maybe 600s, they basically forward a document that says from Constantine that's
Yeah.
supposed to be
That's what it was.
giving the Western Roman Emperor to the Pope at the time. I forget the exact Pope. And they did use this as their excuse to be like, well, actually, because we have the authority to do it, we can crown the emperor, which is why the Pope crowned Charlemagne, along with the fact that at the time, the person in charge of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, was a woman who blinded her own son so that she would rule in her own right, which delegitimized the Byzantine Empire just a tiny bit.
Well, so now I remember why I didn't include it,
That was
because
the 8th century.
it is supposed to be a forgery.
Oh yeah, it's definitely.
It's supposed to be a forgery.
They admit it's a
Hold
forgery.
on. But it, to a certain extent, it doesn't really matter what forged document they used. In fact, Charlemagne claimed he didn't even know he was gonna become the emperor. Even though him and the Pope had been hanging out in the palace for 6 months, somehow he never saw it coming, right?
Well, it's important for Florence.
It is also very important for people. So
That's how they track it.
I'm not saying that it's not important, but the reason I didn't list it in there was just, that's its own controversy on its own. So we'll just, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, we'll just push that to the side for a second.
Did you tell us your source of all this research?
Yes. The list I had to put together through various Catholic sources,
Uh-huh.
and then all of the other quotes that I've got in here, I've cited. So mostly the three sources I used was the Schmemann book. I used the Timothy Ware book. I used the book by Kalanikios, that's another history, and H. Bauer, which is another history book. They all have various level of depth on certain things, so.
Can you give that to us next time?
Sure, yeah, actually I can, half of those I think I can put on WhatsApp, because they're just Word files.
Thank you.
So, but now, we're starting to get into the point where the popes are essentially having to work around these various Holy Roman emperors that they're establishing. The emperors are picking the popes they want, and the popes turn around and crown them, and this is this vicious cycle that begins. So that goes on for a while. There's Otto's 1, 2, and 3. Right around the turn of the millennium, Sylvester II was the first French pope who was considered to be a scholar and was the tutor to Otto's the first, second, and third. The next pope, 1003, first pope chosen by the new ruler of Rome, John Crescentius. Shocking. Crescentius picks up some popes after that. Sergius IV reigned when the Muslim leader Al-Hakim of the Fatimids ordered the complete demolition of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, along with Christ's tomb and many other churches throughout Egypt and Syria. The Christians in the Middle East began to be forced into conversion or be executed. So this is the thing that starts to incite Christians of the West against the Muslims in the Holy Land. It's not as if it was what they wanted in the first place, but this is a point in which they feel this is an egregious attack. And so later on, when the Crusades start, that's part of the justification for why they got to go back. We got to go back. They have to go there and right that wrong. Never mind the fact that they've had Jerusalem for like 300 years at this point. But that was the incident that starts to push them over the edge. Also in Europe, as we get to the point of the Crusades, Europe is beginning to flower. It's beginning to establish much more complex civilizations. The barbarians formerly owned land and were mostly tribal have become much more permanent, and they're turning into more what we would think of as France and Germany and so forth. But during this time period, the people in the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines, still didn't really think much of Rome in the West. They kind of considered it a little bit backwater. And it was just not something they weren't as paying as much attention to anymore, because they had so many incursions and dealings with the Muslims. So they were spending a lot more time in survival mode, but they still had a very sophisticated opinion of themselves, and no doubt for good reasons, because they had done so much and they had so much civilization and grandeur to bring. And also they're the heart of Orthodoxy. So of course they had, a certain opinion about their place in the world.
especially in the 900s, because they had a big revival in Tower and
Was that after the plague?
Yeah, especially
Justinian's
with
plague, I think.
There was the plague, and then but they also just were able to reconquer a lot of the Balkans from
The Avars and stuff.
the Avars and they conquered the Bulgarians.
Now, this is an important thing to bring up. I don't know if the map can do me real justice on this,
Then in the east they get to Antioch.
but one of the things that happens is, coming from the east, you have the Slavic movements, And then you have the Avars, all right? And that kind of, much like I described how the Celts cut the Germanic people off from the eastern part of the Mediterranean, in a similar way, that begins to cut off Western world from the Eastern world. So now we're not only separated by distance, but we're separated by an inability to really communicate. So now everything, to a large extent, comes in written form. And as we've discovered, when you text things to people, sometimes there's disagreement, right? So this is one of the several things that starts to lead toward this idea of the papal supremacy, not only in a theoretical sense, but in a very tangible sense, because they really are the only vestige of organization on that side of the world. So there's some back and forth with the popes being brought in by the Holy Roman Emperor, and there's anti-popes involved, and there's a lot of very ugly things that happened in that time period. So Benedict VIII was the Pope when they defeated the Muslims in Sardinia with the help of the Normans. The Normans part from the northern part of France, so they come all the way down into Italy to help the Pope out. You're okay. Benedict the IX is an interesting guy, nephew of John the 19th, and would be the Pope 3 times. Elected for the first time at age 20 through his godfather's bribery, known to be a philanderer and a murderer, and after 12 years, he was forced to abdicate and leave Rome. The next Pope was Pope for 56 days. When Benedict returns to Rome with an army, he's deposed and excommunicated, and Benedict makes himself Pope again. He then ends up selling his papacy to the same godfather that bribed his way into being Pope.
He sold
He sold it. Here, you give me so much money and you can be Pope now.
like 30 pieces of silver.
I don't know how much it
I
was.
think it was a little more than 30.
The same guy that used his bribery was still the Pope. And the story goes on him that he ends up being, after he comes back again, he ends up being killed by the husband of a woman who was adulterously engaged. So godfather of Benedict, Gregory VI, used violence to push back protesters, which led to an appeal to the Holy Roman Emperor Henry by the clergy. And then both Sylvester III and Benedict IX were deposed, and Gregory resigns after admitting that he bought the papacy. So Clement II, chosen by Holy Roman Emperor Henry, he's chosen by Henry to be the Pope, and then he turns around and officially crowns Henry as the official Holy Roman Emperor, and also the Queen of Germany, whose name I couldn't find. Benedict becomes Pope again. We talked about what happens to that. Damascus doesn't matter because he ends up only there for 23 days. Leo IX reigns from 1049 to 1054, reigns during the schism and dies after a failed war with the Normans. So I gave a little information on Islam here. This is very much simplified, let's say, standard Islamic narrative story of it, because going off from that we can spend forever. I gave you the general idea. He has visions in 610. He flees to Medina. In Medina, he essentially builds up an army. They capture Mecca at 630. And then in 632, Muhammad dies, but his followers move on. The rightly guided caliphs, Ali and Abu Bakr and the other guys. Following Muhammad's death is known as the Rashidun Caliphate, which lasted for about 30 years. During this period, the Muslim administration and government was established and ruled the Middle East. Governed by the so-called righteous caliphs or spiritual leaders. By 644, these 4 leaders helped Islam spread by the war, and grow far beyond the Middle Eastern borders through conquests of major cities like Baghdad, Jerusalem, and Alexandria. They would then go on to conquer northern and western Africa, effectively taking control over much of the Byzantine and Persian territory. And at this point, like I said, they actually start to take control of the sea lanes and the shipping lane, slowly but surely, because they didn't really have a navy to speak of. The third caliph, Uthman, who's considered to be one of their greatest thinkers, and wrote part of the hadiths. He wrote part of the hadiths, which is the description of stories about Muhammad, and also supposed to be enlightening on how to act as a Muslim and so on and so forth. He created a version of the Quran that became standardized and widely used throughout the Islamic world, and helped to establish new schools that taught Arabic and Islamic studies. And this is an interesting point. From what I've been finding out, Arabic is a fairly new language in terms of what we think of as languages, right? And one of the things that doesn't happen until around this period is actually a little farther after this, is the addition of vowel notes within the language itself. So up until then, there was all consonants that were used. So the name Muhammad, when you go back to without consonants, is Mahmud, which apparently is a title that means the beautiful one. So the name Muhammad is a title. Take that for what you want. We'll talk about that in the next one. This is also a period in which hundreds of mosques were being built throughout the empire. After the death of the last caliph in 661, the Umayyad Caliphate took over the empire and ruled until 750. Those are the ones who made it all the way into Spain. And this begins the so-called Golden Age during the Abbasid dynasty, which came to power by overthrowing the Umayyad in 750. So a couple of things about the Great Schism, right? So we talked about distance issues. We talked about how there's a sort of a language barrier that develops over time between Latin and Greek. We talked about certain political power struggles that happen between, after the end of the Western Empire and the decision of who becomes Pope and who decides that Pope is valid and things like that. One of the other problems that comes up, it's more of an ancient problem, is the issue of the Sunday Passover, the celebration of Easter, the Sunday following 14 Nisan, such as was known in, this is on page 11, throughout Syria, Egypt, Pontus, and Latin West. Okay. And I'm sure Zach could explain to me more about the ins and outs of that, but we're going to table that for a minute.
What?
Never mind. We're going to table that for a minute and move on to the next thing. A fundamental misunderstanding between the eastern and western halves of the church became deeper, ending in a final separation. In Rome, it was increasingly apparent that a firm conception of the papacy had developed, according to which special God-given rights had been granted to the Bishop of Rome over the universal church. Pope Celestine's legate at Ephesus declared that, quote, Peter, to whom our Lord Jesus Christ was given the keys of the kingdom and the power to bind and loose sins, now and forevermore remains and judges in the person of his successors. So that argument is central to the concept of the papacy as the universal head of the church. What?
Like Antioch being founded by Peter.
Well, Paul was there too. Let's ignore the fact that Paul was there and got martyred in the same year. Look, I need to get all the way up my back. No, it's their argument. Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, as I've said before, has a certain cognitive dissonance about certain things. That's one.
I have a question, just real quick. I don't really know how else to phrase this question, but I guess the Catholic Church as it stands now, are they like proud, I guess, of the succession of popes? Because I mean, granted on our conversation, right, there's like a lot of corruption, I think that happens in this. So,
Increasingly after the 400s, it becomes
right.
more and more that way.
So I guess like, does the Catholic Church have an opinion, like, when they teach, I don't know, I guess, are they happy with the success, like how it ended up happening with the history?
I would say the general consensus is not that they're happy about it so much as it is that that's the way things played out. And that's why some of the popes are saints and the other ones aren't.
So it's
And
still-
they even made a statement, after Pope John Paul II died, when people were complaining that they were making him a saint. And that one of their arguments was, well, we make saints of people. To which I was like, that's a terrible argument. But for a long time, pretty much every pope did get canonized as a saint because they all were martyred. After that, you have people who are more or less political, more or less involved in the natural order of things, if you will. I mean, if you brought it up to somebody who knows a lot about Catholicism and knows about history, I'm sure they would have reasons to justify whatever various things, but I wouldn't say that they're proud of that. But I would say they see it as a formative period, and a lot of things that we'll talk about next time come out of that time period. Like Father Jim was saying, like there's a reaction to certain forms of corruption that leads them to trying to correct that. And sometimes that correction actually is not better. But in other ways, to them, again, they were Christianity in the West, and they essentially conquered Arianism in the West and Christianized the rest of Europe. So
They probably mostly be proud of an apostolic succession. I don't think they're happy about the bad folks, which they would openly with people are bad folks.
I guess
Yeah.
in my head, it just like makes me question on like, is it like legitimate apostolic succession with the corruption?
that's a great question, and I think that's worth pondering.
Yeah.
It is a rhetorical question. It's a rhetorical answer. But no, it is worth considering. It is part of the history of the Western world, and so, it is what it is. Take it and apply it how you feel. I hope this actually, part of what I'm hoping here is that this will spurn interest and make you kind of dig into more of it on your own. But there's just a couple more things.
But can I just answer it? Because you can't rule out the truth of the Holy Spirit action. And so we're all corrupt. We're all fallen, we're all fallible. So, the office is different than the person.
Yeah.
And so we can't take that away. So when there is even if it's nepotism or favoritism or whatever, when there is a consecration of a leader in the church, a priest or a deacon or whatever, the person is failed from the beginning. But so God's activity in the world was alive and well, even in these failed individuals. I think that's how you have to look at it. It's the Spirit is, and somehow God used really corrupt people in Scripture too, to send His Son for the Holy Spirit. And these are his relatives. Some of them were really bad. So I don't know. We don't know the reasoning or whatever. But the Spirit, God doesn't make mistakes. The people are fallible.
Right.
I think
And
that's probably what it is.
This is part of the reason I took the time to try to go through the timeline and set it up a little bit. So you can see where they were getting it right. Right. And then you can also see where they were getting it wrong.
Yeah.
And so take it as a whole,
Ways.
but like Father Jim's saying, it's a constitution of people. And the Pope, whoever he is a person who was made investitured with the shepherding of the flock.
He has to answer for that.
That's that's on him. I don't
The
want to,
office is.
which I think it's worth noting too. After the fall of Rome, we enter what's called the Dark Ages, and it's called that for a reason. It's not just because it was always dark outside. It's because it was a brutal place. And the beginning of the papacy after 476 has to take that into account, because it came and it intruded into their lives, right? The brutality of the outside world, of the barbarian tribes, of the Arian heresy, all of that is upon their back. And, as we talked about, there's times when they just didn't even have money. Like people are they're butchering people's personal economy in order to, survive as a group. And this is, like I said, this time here going into 1000 is where Europe is beginning to like resurge. There's a population boom. There's a lot more unity within the individual groups, which causes more consistency, which leads to growth, which leads to progress, right? And so in terms of that, I think the Catholics are proud of, Roman Catholics are proud of making it through that and bringing Europe into a civilized place that, you know, up until very recently, was almost exclusively Christian, if not, you know, Catholic in particular. All right, so I just want to. So the next big institutional issue is the filioque. All right, the filioque is an addition to the creed that means "and of the Son." The Holy said they changed the creed to establish an idea that the Holy Spirit progresses from the Father and from the Son. Supposedly, at the Council of Toledo in 589, this was not standardized within the Roman Catholic sphere, but it became part of the idea that this is how we combat the Arian heresy by accentuating how Christ is equal to God the Father. But from the Eastern perspective, you're diminishing the place of the three persons within their own unity and how we should try to understand them. So that's an issue that comes up. This idea then spreads from Spain into France and into Germany, and it was welcomed by Charlemagne, who a lot of people say was originally an Arian. Okay. Welcomed by Charlemagne, writers from the Charlemagne's court accused the Greeks of heresy because they recited the original creed. Rome continued to use the creed in its original form, and it wasn't until about 850 that the Greek world even started to pay attention to it. So for about 100 years throughout that area, it was being used not as an official portion of the liturgy at that point, but within many of the churches within that sphere, it was starting to become more commonplace. Besides the papacy and the filioque, there are certain other lesser matters of the church: clergy marriage, priestly celibacy, fasting rules. I can see where I was typing too fast. I got so many mistakes. Leavened versus unleavened bread within the liturgy. So these were top of the big things, which is basically papal authority and the filioque. We have these other, not that they're unimportant, but a little bit less important flavors, so to speak, that are being changed between the East and the West.
If I recall at the time, leavened bread was actually one of the more major issues that they had with each other.
Well, that's always been a bone of contention.
I mean, yeah, but one of the popes like killed like 30 Orthodox monks because they refused to use.
Hold on, we're not done.
So
That's kind of my point. It was one of the major issues.
It was a major issue, but compared to the filioque, it's secondary, right? Compared to understanding God, whether or not you use leavened or unleavened bread is a different discussion. All right. I'm not going to tell you which one is right, but you might be able to guess because I'm Orthodox. Right. But I'm saying these were other things that do matter, like priestly celibacy and a priest be married after he becomes a priest, these kind of things. Those were divergences that happened within the Hieronima of the East and the West. Those divergences are a problem because when you have two groups that don't communicate very well, never see each other, when they do see each other, they have these things to argue about. It makes it difficult to have unity, which is also why the filioque and papal authority and all of that matters so much, because we have to try to understand each other in order to be in unity with each other. East and West were further separated from each other by the Avar and Slav invasions. We talked about that. And in 1054, there was a severe quarrel. So I want to, rather than read the Cliff Notes, I want to read this little section from the Timothy Ware book. The severe quarrel, the Normans had been forcing the Greeks in Byzantine Italy to conform to Latin usages. The Patriarch of Constantinople, Michael Cyrilius, in return demands that the Latin churches at Constantinople should adopt Greek practices. And in 1052, when they refused, he closed them. This was perhaps harsh, but as Patriarch, he was fully entitled to do it. Among the practices to which Michael and his supporters particularly objected was the Latin use of azymes, unleavened bread, in the Eucharist, an issue which had not figured in the dispute of the 9th century. And in 1053, Cyrilius took up a more conciliatory tone when wrote to Pope Leo IX, offering to restore the Pope's name to the diptychs. If you don't know what the diptychs are, they're ancient a way of keeping track of who's a member of the church. And when you, let's say, would move from one state to another, one diocese to another, that was part of what would happen is they'd add you to the diptych, and now you were a member of that parish or something to that effect. Or it was a way of validating whether or not you were actually a part of the church that you said you came from, instead of some, Arian priest trying to find a new jurisdiction or something like that.
Is it different from the diptychs we have today?
Well, I'm not sure about that. Back then, it was just
I didn't hear the question.
the diptychs.
What about it?
Did they do it the same way now as they do then?
By diptych, I mean the icon diptych. I don't know.
No, it was.
I'll say the type of document still exists.
Is it
Of
just
the
like a piece, it's just a, like
It's a
Father Jim and I got the email today about our updated diptychs. So,
It's a list.
yeah.
And what they would originally do is write it on like a soft piece of metal, like tin or something like that.
How that relates to the icon, the double icon, I'm not sure. Yeah.
That's outside of my wheelhouse right now.
Yeah.
But the important part was it was essentially a way of cataloging who is at which parish and are full members of the church.
For being community.
But then later on, it becomes very important for that particular reason. So offering to put Pope Leo IX back on the diptychs is like saying we consider you to be in communion with us again, right? So that's a big thing. In response to this offer and to settle the disputed questions of Greek and Latin usages, Leo in 1054 sends 3 legates to the Constantinople, the chief of them being Humbert, the bishop of Silvia Candida. The choice of Cardinal Humbert was unfortunate, for both he and Cyrilius were men of stiff and intransigent temper, whose mutual encounter was not likely to promote goodwill amongst Christians. Those legates, when they called on Cyrilius, did not create a favorable impression. Thrusting a letter from the Pope at him, they retired without giving the usual salutations. And the letter itself, although signed by Leo, had in fact been drafted by Humbert. It was distinctly unfriendly in tone. After this, the patriarch refused to have further dealings with the legates. Eventually, Humbert lost patience. And I think if I remember correctly, they didn't talk to him for like 2 months. Like he was staying in Constantinople and they just refused to speak to him at that point. So at that point, Humbert loses patience and laid a bull of excommunication against Cyrilius on the altar of the church and the Holy Wisdom. Story goes that he did it during the Easter Mass. So he basically walks in the church, throws the excommunication down, walks out.
During the liturgy.
It's very subtle, Among other ill-founded charges in this document, Humbert accused the Greeks of omitting the filioque from the creed. Humbert promptly left Constantinople without offering any further explanation of his act, and on returning to Italy, he represented the whole incident as a great victory for the See of Rome. Celerius and his synod retaliated by anathemizing Humbert, but not the whole Roman Church. And the attempt at reconciliation left matters worse than before. But even after 1054, friendly relations between the East and West continued, and the two parts of Christendom were not yet conscious of the great gulf of separation between them, and the people on both sides still hoped that the misunderstandings could be cleared up without too much difficulty. From a military point of view, however, the Crusades began with a great eclat. Antioch was captured, Jerusalem was recaptured, and the First Crusade was brilliant. So at this point, we're moving into the territory of the next thing, which is what we're going to talk about, which is essentially the ascension of the papacy to its full power. We're going to talk about the Crusades, their intentions, how they really played out. But just as a spoiler alert, what many people really consider to be the time when the real schism happened and it was practically irreversible was when the Fourth Crusade sacked Constantinople in 1204. So for the next 200 years, the Western Church kind of is on the rise in terms of power and authority, and the Greek Church starts to be diminished by the circumstances of the outside forces of the Muslims primarily. And so that's where we're going to call it for today. I appreciate you all listening to my long and boring screed, and I'll pass it on to Deacon Munu.
Well, we just want to say thank you. A long one tonight, but I think thorough and very interesting. So thank you. And our next Orthodoxy and Catholicism session is on November 17th. So we have a few weeks break to prep for the next session. Next week on Wednesday night is family night. So join us. We'll have a meal and we'll have a very full activity center. And then we'll have a Bible study the week after that. And then this session
That's the last.
on November 17th.
Huh? No,
Next one. Did I say
next
last?
one is what day?
November 17th.
November 2nd, 17th.
All right.
Prayer.
Yes, yes, please.
Stand and pray. God is with us through his divine grace and love towards mankind, always, now and ever, and unto ages of ages.
Amen.
Amen. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you all for coming. I appreciate everybody being here. I appreciate seeing new faces every time.
Yeah.
Go, tell your friends.